Hi, folks, and welcome to the first topic in Unit 2 of the Higher Human Biology course. This first topic is a relatively short one, and we're going to be looking at gamete production in both the male and female human reproductive organs, the testes and the ovaries. So, we're going to kick off by looking at gamete production in the testes, first of all. So, our testes, as we remember from Nat 5, hopefully, are the organ which produce sperm in males. Okay, so they produce sperm. Now, that's all we learned at National 5, but at higher, we need to know a little bit more about the structures involved in the production of sperm. So within the testes, there's an area called the seminiferous tubules. Okay, there are seminiferous tubules within the testes. And if we look at a cross section of the seminiferous tubules here, we can see those circular tubules. Okay, circular tubule here, and the edge of another circular tubule there. Now, inside of those tubules, we have little cells which produce our gametes. Okay, now we know that the cells that produce the gametes are called germline cells. We know that from the start of Unit 1. Okay, so you can see some germline cells here, and those cells will divide to form our gametes. You can also see some sperm which are a bit more matured there, okay, which are a bit more fully formed. And just outside of our seminiferous tubules, you can see these other cells here, which are called interstitial cells. Okay, now, interstitial cells are important because they produce the male sex hormone testosterone. Okay, so you need to know these terms, but you also need to be able to identify them on a diagram as well. So we've got germline cells here. These are the cells that will divide to form the gametes. We have got the sperm cells here, which are starting to mature and develop, and we've got interstitial cells here outside of the tubule, and those are the ones that secrete testosterone. Okay, so you do need to remember that. That's both the structure and the function of each of these parts here. Now, in the bottom diagram below here, we talk about two other parts of the male reproductive system. And these are important, actually, these two parts, because without them, our sperm would have no way to actually swim. So we have a prostate gland and we have seminal vesicles, okay? And we can see them in our diagram here. We've got the seminal vesicle here, and we've got the prostate gland here. Now, what both of them do is they secrete fluids. Okay, they secrete a fluid. The fluid's called semen, although you don't need to know that in the exam. But they secrete this fluid that then helps to maintain the mobility and the viability of the sperm. Okay, and that is a term you do need to remember because that does get asked about quite regularly in exams. Okay, so the prostate gland, this one here, and the seminal vesicles, this one here, both contribute fluids. They secrete or release fluids that maintain the mobility and viability of the sperm. Essentially, what that means, mobility is the ability for the sperm to move, okay? And we obviously want the sperm to be able to move so they can, when they enter the female reproductive system, they can move towards the egg. And the viability. So the viability is the likelihood that it's going to survive and it's going to get to its destination. It's going to be successful in its purpose, okay? So it maintains the mobility and the viability of the sperm. So that's what we need to remember about gamete production in the testes, okay? They are produced in the seminiferous tubules. Testosterone is released from the interstitial cells, and the prostate gland and seminal vesicles secrete the fluids that help to maintain the mobility and viability of our sperm. On to gamete production in the ovaries. So the ovaries contain what are called immature ova. Those are like eggs which have not matured yet. If we have a look at the picture here of the ovary, we can see these immature ova here where it says primary follicles. Those are the immature ova. Then what happens during various stages of development over time, during different parts of the month, then those follicles, those ova, will start to mature and develop, okay, until they're ready to be released. But we'll talk more about that in a future topic. Okay, so they're in various stages of development, these immature ova, and you can see that from the diagram here, different stages of development. Now, each of these ovums is surrounded by a follicle that protects the ovum and secretes hormones, okay? So you need to remember that term there, the follicle. So you can see the follicle around the ovum. The ovum's that sort of cream-coloured part there, and the browner part around it, that's the follicle. So the follicle protects. You can see it's providing a protective layer around it, and it also secretes hormones. And again, we'll learn about the name of that hormone shortly when we go into a future topic. But for now, it's enough to say that it protects and it secretes hormones. Now, why is this important? Because when we eventually secrete the ovum into the oviduct, it will then meet, hopefully, if you're trying to fertilize it, it will meet a sperm, which will then go on to form our diploid zygote, okay? So when the mature ova are released into the oviduct, they may be fertilized by a sperm cell to form a diploid zygote. And we know about fertilization from National 5, don't we? We understand what's happening there, the fusion of those haploid gamete nuclei, okay? So the mature ova are released into the oviduct here, and the sperm will come along and they will fertilize that ovum, and then that will obviously go on to divide, and then eventually that will become an embryo. We know that from National 5 as well. That's gamete production in the ovaries. So let's have a look at some past paper questions relating to this topic. So we can see this one says the diagram below shows a section through part of the testes. So this is a very similar diagram. In fact, it's the same one that we saw in the PowerPoint there. Okay, just to make this question a little bit easier and more familiar for you. So which of these cells produce testosterone? Right. So the first thing we have to remember is which cells produce testosterone. And within the testes, the cells that produce testosterone are called the interstitial cells. Now, which one of these represent the interstitial cells? Well, the interstitial cells are not found in the seminiferous tubules, these circular things. Okay, we do not find the interstitial cells in there. We find them outside of those. And then if we look at the diagram, we can see, well, B is pointing to the cells that are outside of the seminiferous tubules. Okay, if this question said something like, which cells produce the sperm? Then we would be thinking, okay, it's these cells inside the seminiferous tubules. But if it's asking for testosterone, it'll be these interstitial cells that are not in the seminiferous tubule. This question here, a function of the interstitial cells in the testes is to produce what? Okay, and again, it's pretty much the same question, but asking it in a different way. They do not produce sperm. Sperm is produced in the seminiferous tubules. They do produce testosterone, so that's going to be our answer there, B. Let's just go through the other ones, though. Seminal fluid. So the fluids that are released from the seminal vesicles are not due to that, so we can score that out. And the FSH, we haven't actually learned about FSH yet, but it's not going to be the answer for this one either. Okay, anyway, our answer there is going to be B. Okay, and we eliminate all the other options. Okay, question 7. Which of the following correctly matches the reproductive organ, tissue, or cell with its correct function in the reproductive tract? Okay, so the seminiferous tubules, do they produce testosterone? No, they don't. So we can say nope to that one. Does the prostate gland produce sperm? Nope, that's the seminiferous tubules. Do the interstitial cells secrete luteinizing hormone? Nope, they don't. They secrete testosterone. And the seminal vesicles, do they secrete fluids that maintain the mobility and viability of the sperm? Yes, they do. So our answer is going to be D for that one. Okay, number 9 here. Which of the following correctly shows the functions of some parts of the male reproductive system? So the seminiferous tubules, what is their job? Okay, we know the seminiferous tubules are involved in the production of sperm. So we can tick that and we can tick that. But we know it's not going to be C or D now, okay, because they are not right for that first column. We go on to the interstitial cells. Now, we know from earlier on that the interstitial cells are responsible for the secretion of testosterone, so it's going to be that one. And we know that this is wrong here as well. So we know our answer is going to be A before we even get to the final column. But as always, we should just check it anyway. Does the prostate gland secrete thin liquid which forms part of it? It does, okay? It secretes those fluids that maintain the mobility and viability of the sperms. That's that one's true, okay? And every other option there has at least one or two of those functions wrong for each of the parts. Okay, folks, so I hope that very quick run through of that topic was useful and that you're feeling quite comfortable with all that content. I'll be back in the next lesson to talk more about the hormonal control of reproduction. That's all for now, folks. Class dismissed.